So I think I was about 7, second grade maybe, and I was sitting on the back stoop of our small elementary school. I was living in a small town in northern Illinois, and I was watching. There was a little bit of a decline and then a flat area where all these boys were playing football. And I was sitting there watching them, and I'd done this on many occasions. And that day I decided, you know, I'm kind of lonely sitting here in the stoop by myself. I'm going to go join them. And I kind of scampered down this little hill to this flat area. Well, I had no idea how to play football or anything. And so I have no idea what I did, but I think it's something like I went up and just grabbed the ball. And of course all the boys turned and yelled at me because I was interfering in their game. And I remember one of them in particular said, "You think you're just hot stuff because your mom's one of the playground supervisors at noon." And I stood there and thought, I never connected me with my mother being the playground supervisor at noon at all. And all I really wanted to do was play along with these other boys in the game that they were enjoying so much. And I didn't say anything, and I probably dropped the ball and put my head down and kind of wandered away, kind of choking back my tears that day. And that was the only time I ever tried to play with the boys at the school. And so from that time on, every recess, every time over lunch hour, I played with the girls. And so they were much more accepting. I played hopscotch. I was really good at jumping rope. I don't know what happened. I go to CrossFit now. I can't jump rope for the life of me. But for some reason at that point, I was pretty good at it. And it just was sort of the group that I was with all the way through probably 5th grade, because it was the only place I felt comfortable. Well, when I was in 6th grade, we moved to Rockford, and by 7th grade, I was going to a junior high. And it was kind of this completely different world. It was a brand new junior high school on the wealthy neighborhood. My little working class neighborhood somehow got hooked on to this neighborhood. And so that was the junior high I went to. It was 1,100 7th and 8th graders. It was huge. Had a full theater, had a full pool, and they even had a swim team. And I thought to myself, they were having tryouts for the swim team, and I thought, well, here's something I can do. Because when I was in this little town in Illinois, we actually had a YMCA, and I had taken all the swim lessons, and everybody always said, "Oh, Jim, you're a really good swimmer." So I don't even think I told my parents I was going to do this. I show up for the swim tryouts, and you need to know something about that time period. It was the time of Mark Spitz winning all those gold medals. Some of you that are about my age kind of remember those posters of him and his dark hair and his mustache and his hairy chest with all those gold medals wearing a Speedo bikini. So of course that was what was popular at the time. So I walk into the swimming pool where all the boys are waiting to try out, and they're all wearing Speedo bikinis, and I've got the more modest, what would be a normal suit today, sort of the jammer trunk kind of thing, and I remembered having these colored stripes going across it, and I'm sure I was a sight for sore eyes. Well, I was ridiculed immediately the second I set foot on the edge of the pool. I didn't leave. I stayed for the tryout, but I was so mortified I never even looked if I made the team. I probably didn't. And I never went back to try out for another sport again for the rest of my life. So it was one of these things that was the opening salvo of my junior high year. Now everybody hates junior high, right? But I was particularly awkward because I had grown up, when I was living in that small town, we were way out in the country. There was cornfields and nothing else. I didn't particularly get along with my brother, and there were no kids. So I was very socially awkward, always played with the girls at school, was essentially raised by women. My father wasn't around a lot because he worked a lot. And so I think I just was quite interesting to look at and to react with. So I was very much a target for bullies. I was telling Tom, because he was walking around with all his finance documents earlier, I was a bookworm. I mean, I was smart and all that kind of stuff. So I would always be going to junior high with all these books under my arm, and immediately some jock would come up and throw them on the floor, and they'd be everywhere, and I'd have to be picking them up in the middle of the day. Kind of got pushed into lockers a few times, knew which door not to go into early in the morning because I'd probably get beat up. I think the most humiliating thing was when I'd be standing in the lunch line with all other people around who didn't even know who I was. They would come up and ask me if I was a boy or a girl, and if I was a fag or a femme. And because I knew nothing about sexual identity or gender identity at all, I was so naive, but they found a way to pick on me because, and now think about this, I laugh at it now. Those of you that are old enough to remember a JCPenney catalog, okay, there were these outfits you could put together where the pants and the shirt and the like sweater or whatever went together, and I thought it was really cool, and on my older mother and aunt's advice, that's what I bought to go to school. About the same time that adolescent boys were, their bodies were getting more stronger and they were showing off their athleticism, they were in jeans and t-shirts and tennis shoes. So you can imagine what I looked like, especially with my long curly hair at the time. But nonetheless, these were all kinds of things that really hurt and really drove into me this lasting ouch moment. For me. In fact, to react to it, I guess I wasn't, obviously I was a kid. I wasn't self-aware to understand that maybe the way I projected myself was leading to some of this. I just blamed it on my father. Because after all, fathers are supposed to teach boys how to play sports. They're supposed to teach boys how to be men and grow up and be able to survive in that kind of an environment. And my father did none of that. I don't think he knew how to play football, frankly. So I just, through all kinds of anger, and frankly, you would not have wanted to live with me as a teenager. And I caused all kinds of pain probably for my father. And I think probably had a lot to do with some of the rough times in my parents' marriage because I was very close to my mother and probably my mother's favorite. But that was my ouch moment that to this day, as a 50-plus man, still comes back to haunt me sometimes. And about 3 years ago, my favorite barber up in Appleton moved to Canada, and I had to find a new one. Well, the only African-American barber shop in Appleton happens to be in my neighborhood, and I thought, well, now I'm a minister, we're into social justice, and so I should patronize this kind of a business. I should go in there and get my hair cut, knowing I'd probably be the only white person in there. And I was terrified. But not because of racial dynamics, because I was going on a stereotype that these black male barbers were going to talk about sports, and I'd have no idea what they were talking about and didn't know what to do. So that little ouch moment way back from when I was 7 years old just came back to haunt me like anything I couldn't believe. Well, I want to acknowledge some of those quotes I did today. There's 3 of them that really stick out for me. I already said the W.C. Fields one. It ain't what they call you, it's what you answer to. I picked that one because I had forgotten about those bullies in the lunch line all these years, and the second I read it, their words came back and their faces haunted me. And I thought, isn't that perfect? They were calling me all kinds of names, and I felt compelled to answer to that, and I didn't need to. I let them have the power in that situation. But who's that strong in 7th grade, right? And then Brene Brown. Owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Now, you've heard me talk about Dr. Brene Brown before, and she's just one of my favorite people on the planet. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about her research on wholeness, because I think it ties into today. If you don't know who Dr. Brene Brown is, she's a social science researcher at the University of Houston. And what her team does is these thousands of interviews on these really unscientific sounding topics like forgiveness, wholeness, shame, love, those kind of things. So she takes these really squishy concepts, interviews thousands of people, and they, of course, catalog all the responses, all the words that they say, and they look for themes. And what she's trying to do is try to understand the brain, not so much in the physical makeup of it and the chemical makeup of it, but how our brains work in a world that we live in and how interactions work, and to try to offer advice and ways to overcome some of our faults, she would say. So she's a pretty prolific author. Well, not that prolific, but her books are always bestsellers. Let me put it that way. She's done 3 books to my knowledge, and she started becoming famous because she was a TED Talk phenom about 5-6 years ago, I think. And you can just Google Brene Brown and you'll find a lot of her TED Talks, and they're very much worth listening to. She just takes a lot of very complex topics and make them so easy to understand, and her examples are fantastic. So today, my source of a lot of this was actually from Oprah Winfrey Network. Oprah interviewed Brene Brown on a program called Super Soul Sunday, and the title of it was, "Are You Hooked on a False Story?" And it was particularly about Brene Brown's most recent book, Rising Strong, Fall, Learn, Get Up, and Do It Again. Now I love, like I said, I love what Brene Brown does, because for me it's where science meets human behavior, and today, for this month's theme is wholeness, and so it kind of met right into that theme of wholeness. And there are 3 quotes from this video that just struck home with me that seem to be appropriate for this morning. The one is her view of spirituality. She believes, she is a Christian and goes to, I think, some mega church somewhere based on her comments. I don't know exactly. But she said spirituality is very important to me, but this was her definition. Spirituality is this deeply held belief that we are deeply connected to each other by something greater than us, and that something greater is rooted in love and belonging. And she said, for me it's God, but that doesn't matter. It can be nature, it can be the universe, the mystery of life, it doesn't matter. She said, but I firmly believe that we are connected by something greater than us, and it's all rooted in love and belonging, because that's how we are hardwired. And she has talked about wholeheartedness before, and to me it's just another fancy way of wholeness, but she calls it wholeheartedness when you say, I'm enough, and my imperfections never change that. And she has a whole TED talk about shame and guilt, and how to be truly happy in this world, we have to be vulnerable, and you kind of have to lead with your whole heart, and that's why she uses the term wholeheartedness. And that those people that are the most vulnerable will end up being the most happy in life. And then she added something, a quote that I hadn't heard before, and it dealt with physical health. And her little quote was, the body keeps score, and it always wins. And what she's saying is, if you let all this negativity just kind of rule your life, if you let your ouch moments take control over how you live your life, the body keeps score. It's very impartial. It doesn't care that you want to avoid that and try to get over it. It'll keep score and eventually come back in ways that impact your physical health. So what she was talking about in this book is that it's all about these stories that we tell ourselves, and our brains need it. They need our ouch stories, or they get the ouch stories, and this is how they process it. She goes, our brains are hardwired for survival. We all know that. It's like, evolution. But the way we do it in modern times, she says, is the brain is looking for a story. When an ouch moment comes up, it's looking for a story for it to make sense of it, to know that, okay, we're safe. These people are safe. These people are dangerous. These people you can blame. These people you don't have to. Or maybe it's me. It's something I did, but it's okay. We can move on from this. And that's why we come up with all these stories of the good guys and the bad guys and shame and blame and that kind of stuff. And then Oprah added, well, that's uncomfortable. Rather than go there, I go for a couple bags of potato chips. So it says that's when we reach out for the comfort food, the alcohol, drugs, overindulge in screen time, etc., to avoid that discomfort that our brain is feeling when we get that ouch moment. Brene goes on to say, frankly, the brain isn't wired to deal with complex human relationships in a modern world that we have today. And she believes that with her research and what she finds, that humans can be taught or can learn to behave differently. Her premise is that if we lean into the discomfort and kind of push through it, then this revolution can begin where we can live lives of wholeness. Now, a lot of this is therapy 101, but it's interesting the way that she's approached it by interviewing and studying all these people and the way they approach it. And the way she interviewed people that were both successful at this and not so successful, and kind of was looking for differences. So from her perspective, there were 3 things that we needed to do to live lives of wholeness. And she, of course, names them all with the same letter so we can remember them, right? It's reckoning, rumble, and revolution. Reckoning, rumble, and revolution. So the reckoning is really recognizing that an emotional button has been pushed and be willing to go there. Okay, don't immediately come up with a story to compensate for this. She says be willing to be curious about it and look into it. So what this is saying is I'm having an interaction with you, and you said something that triggered something, like probably doubting my masculinity if you wanted to go back to the story from when I was 7 years old. And so suddenly this button would be pushed, and I might suddenly have some sort of an emotional reaction to it. What she's saying is recognize that that's a button that's pushed and be able to be there with that emotion and really understand it. And it's kind of funny because we're talking to people here that are in the upper Midwest, that are descendants of German and Norwegian folk, right, or Scandinavians. We all, if you're like me, you grew up with, oh, that's water under the bridge, or don't cry over spilled milk, or emotions or crying are not going to get you anywhere. So I think it's pretty tough for many of us to go, oh, I'm not feeling so comfortable with that, and to kind of embrace it and think about it and understand it. And then they did an example which I thought was really cool. The interview was in a park somewhere, and I guess it was on a hill. And so Bernays said, well, Oprah, let me give you an example. Like maybe when we finish this interview and we're going back down the hill to our cars, that I would say something like, well, I thought that went pretty well. And Oprah would go, and so she goes, immediately I would get this story like, oh my God, it was awful. She doesn't like me. Why was I ever interviewed for this? I should never do something like this. I should stay in Houston because I can't do this big time kind of stuff. And she goes, and then the next time you call to ask me an interview, that would influence how I would react with you and all this kind of stuff. And Oprah's like, whoa. Kind of stuff, right? So she invented this story, and then she said, and it's not even that story. When I get to my car and I get to my cell phone, I'll see that my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter, would have left a message that she wants to borrow the car, and I'd talk to her and say, well, just because you have your license doesn't mean you get the car anytime you want it, and I just lay into her because I'm hurt because of something from you. So they talked about it and laughed about it, and Oprah goes, well, yeah, my side of the story would be, and you should ask me, and that's what her advice was. You know, I sensed that you weren't completely comfortable with it. What's up with that? She said, well, the story was that I had these high heels on and we were going down the hill and I was afraid I was going to fall, so I took a big breath all of a sudden. It had absolutely nothing to do with you. So I thought it was a humorous example of how we're much better, and this is Brené's words, we're much better at causing hurt than feeling hurt, and we're much better at inflicting pain than freezing pain, and we offload this pain somewhere else than actually feeling it and dealing with it. So after you've reckoned with it or recognized that it's happened, she goes on to the rumble part of her solution, challenging the story. So what do you know for sure about what just happened, and what are you making up? What is your brain just being really creative about? And she says, get honest with the stories we tell ourselves and take responsibility for those emotions. And so she has 3 questions that are part of this rumble. The first is, what more do I need to learn and understand about this situation? In my case, I probably should have stopped and asked, why was I being bullied? Or why did that conjure up such a strong emotion in me? And then the second one is, what more do I need to learn and understand about the people in this story? What do I know, in my case, about my father and his relationship to sports? Years later, when I was an adult and had my head on better, I ended up doing his eulogy and realized that when he was 5 years old, he had scarlet fever and had to stay home an entire year. His older brother was the town jock and was always the hero for everything, and he was always the weakling and never was involved in sports of any kind. And so it's like, oh, that's where that came from. So he wasn't just not raising his son, he didn't have a clue either. So it's kind of an interesting thing to actually learn about my father. And the third is, what more do I need to learn and understand about myself? What do I really think about these jocks? What do I really think about sports? What's wrong with being who I am? Why do I have to watch football on Sunday afternoon? Back then, by the way, I don't even think it was on TV on Sunday afternoons, or at least not in our house. So it's all really understanding what is triggering it, who are those people, and do I really care? Is that really who I am? And why should I be so influenced by their behavior at me? If you go back to W.C. Fields' comment. So what she was saying is those that are willing to rise strong have the ability to live with this kind of discomfort. And the revolution happens because this process just becomes practice. It becomes normal, and you do it all the time. And it's, again, taking responsibility in the world for your own emotions and not allowing yourself to project it onto others ever. And this is a couple quotes that I thought were interesting because our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of everyone. She says, when you make up those stories, and they're usually stories of you are inferior, it affects your inherent worthiness. And then we begin to believe that we're not worthy of being loved. And we must believe we are worthy of being loved for our own inherent worth and dignity. So I want to relate it kind of to this fellowship. Back to the quote from Rumi. That's my third quote I really liked. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. It's all about turning our ouch moments that linger with us forever into these ah moments of wholeness and contentment, that I can live with the fact that I don't like sports and that's okay, right? Mm-hmm. Here, we find a community who should be open to the process that Dr. Brown is talking about. Here, we would encourage you to reckon, rumble, and come into that revolution in your lives. And I kind of compared it to other churches because many dominant, and I'll say Christian churches in this part of the world, you join and it's a very familiar message that when you hit these kind of moments where you don't feel you're worthy, they offer you this deity that says God loves you no matter what, which is probably true, but that's not really the way we approach it. It's not a deity that we say is available to love you, it's us. It's a community that is there to be with you. If you go back to the opening hymn that we sang with the prelude, when you are frightened, who's there? It's supposed to be the community that's there to get you through it, to help you through those questions of our ouches and our feelings of inadequacy and doubting our self-worth. So here we aspire to be an environment where we can lean into this work, but in community, where we can all be honest, where we can be vulnerable, and where we can rumble and escape the negativity. It's a place where we all try to live our lives differently, with more wholeness, and with the happiness that comes from being whole. Ashe, and blessed be.